Hello, my name is Vanita McGee, and this is the Advent of Divine Justice, a practical application of a spiritual process. And we're continuing going into the scroll process. Just to review the previous presentation, we went over the reflection process and the bringing ourselves to account process in order to use Baha'i prayers and the three spiritual prerequisites to come to a conclusion and act through the 5 steps of prayer. And so this slide here shows the transition of from that act to then putting it into word and deed into the scroll process. The scroll process, because that's our communication center. So that's going to represent anything that we say, anything that we do, our tone, our timbre, in terms of communication. Now, again, little review. The 3 spiritual prerequisites. After Shoghi Effendi finishes with the 3 spiritual prerequisites, the zenith point being elimination of race prejudice, and the first 2 being conduct and rectitude and a chaste and holy life, and the zenith point being elimination of race prejudice. So at this particular point, just consider the elimination of race prejudice incorporates all the other 2, because each one's built upon each one to the zenith point. Okay. As soon as he finishes outlining the 3 spiritual prerequisites and all the things, the standards that we're supposed to do, he then says, okay, now we're going to, he's going to show us how we communicate towards each other, the high standards, how we communicate. And what he does is that he introduces this paragraph, which is, I consider, the binding contract. It is a contract. It's the connector between, it's a contract of how we will implement the 3 spiritual prerequisites through prayer and through prayers. And so it basically tells the black and the white that we have to work together. So there's a lot of words there. I leave it to you to read it, understand it, that this is actual contract, and and the purpose is to further build your spiritual transformation by showing what you've learned through your reflection and your bringing to account process, to demonstrate it outwardly to the world and how you talk and how you interact. Then Shoghi Effendi directly goes into the different elements of the scroll process. So he has the white responsibilities of the process, the black responsibilities of the process, and the mutual responsibility of the process. And mind you, when he says black and white, he means a range. He does not, it's not specific to white, not specific to blacks. It means humanity, everything in between. And then there's the mutual responsibilities. That means everybody of the whole range are also responsible for those mutual responsibilities. So this is this slide is an overview of that. And understanding there's a relationship between, in terms of the scroll process, between the supreme effort and the corresponding effort. Shoghi Effendi, when he made this document or this passage of this process, it's perfect. It answers it was when I read this, it answered the question on how we deal with our race prejudice. Remember, the 3rd spiritual prerequisite is elimination of race prejudice. So he's telling us how the standard, how our overall standard, and how we need to communicate it. So, but he designated the responsibilities differently. He made the effort, which I call the catalyst, of the supreme effort to the whites and a corresponding effort to the blacks. And they're both binding under the three spiritual prerequisites via the binding contract. Now, I'm going to go into why they're so distinctive. Now, there's in the past, some Baha'is have kind of misunderstood this function and this passage, and where it comes to the supreme effort and the corresponding effort. And I think it's because of our modern day way that we use the term corresponding. And whereas it was always kind of debated that if the whites make the supreme effort, that the corresponding effort has to be the supreme effort. And that's not how Shoghi Effendi set it up. And that's because in order for this to work, Shoghi Effendi says, what are we dealing with? We're dealing with, status quo, and that status quo has been over history. African American people as slaves have come over here as not even human beings, but as property. We had to make this big transition and proving ourselves that we're not property, that we're human beings, that we have feelings, that we have a soul, that we have, all these same qualities any other human being does, and that we're, up to being a citizen even. And so we've always had to make, over these centuries, we've always had to make the supreme effort to doing that. We've always had to prove ourselves and make that supreme effort, where the whites didn't have to make that supreme effort. They could, they owned us and basically could sit back and just accept it or not accept it. They didn't have to. But what Shoghi Effendi does is that he flips the script and says, now each person is going to have to walk in the other person's shoes. The white folks have to make a supreme effort. They have to initiate. They have to constantly, along with those qualities that come after, and we'll go into that. It'll break it down a little further down in the slides. And the blacks have to make a corresponding effort, which means they have to respond to. And that's why we have the little puzzle piece, because the corresponding effort responds to the supreme effort. Okay, these are just the definitions that clarify that corresponding, that Shoghi Effendi meant corresponding was responding to and not the same. And we've got the definition out of the Oxford English Dictionary, unabridged 1938 version. And there's terminology, because this was written in 1938, Shoghi Effendi used terminology, specific terminology, and there were specific reasons why. The most vital and challenging issues he used in the modern term would be equivalent to racism. And I also added another column in case there's any other definitions that fit under some of these terms, and we could add to them if we need to. And the reason why he did that was that he wanted to, the most vital and challenging issue is that he was more descriptive as to what the issue is that dealing, and so he didn't use the term racist, he used the term race prejudice. Why? Because everybody has race prejudice, racial prejudice. And that means that everybody has to work on it. And by defining it racist, it would basically be buying into the term racism, which is kind of a false, it is kind of a man-made construct. And what Shoghi Effendi is dealing with is a spiritual, from God, a spiritual construct in order to answer the question. And so, these other terms relate to some modern day terms that are commonly used today in trying to deal with the issue. So understand Everybody has to deal with this issue. Now, breaking down the white responsibility a little bit further, um, again, there's the initiator, which is the supreme effort, and then there's and it's how we implement the responsibilities. So there's two focuses. So for the white, their focus is on is all these things that are listed on the slide. Okay, and that's their interpersonal work, and that they work interpersonally, and all of these things relate to the three, through the binding contract of the three spiritual prerequisites. Right? And then how we demonstrate them, you know. And I'm going to say black, even though it says Negro here. I write the name Negro to keep it for historical purposes because it's a historical document. But I'm going to use the modern day vernacular, either African American or black. I use those interchangeably. Anyway, so and our initiator is that corresponding effort. And if you notice, our responsibilities are different than the white effort. So that coincides with our initiation, you know, our effort has to be different as well because it's complementing. And so this, we too still have the responsibility of looking at every one of these lists on this slide and looking at them through the binding contract and the three spiritual prerequisites. Because all of these qualities, all of these are standards that connect to the three spiritual prerequisites at all times. And then there's our mutual standards. This is for everybody, the whole range. You know, everybody has to adhere to these standards. And again, these are also connected through the binding contract with three spiritual prerequisites. And this is a visual. This is a visual representation of the relationship. So again, the mutual responsibilities, the white responsibilities, the black responsibilities. Remember, it's a range connected through the binding contract that's connected through the three spiritual prerequisites. Now we're going to talk about the effect of working with the scroll process. And this slide is a representation of the current state as of today. I mean, we haven't done much other than, you know, but in terms of dealing with this spiritually, we have to take these things seriously. I mean, basically from the binding contract, it says, if we do not deal with this, there will be blood in the streets. And if we've noticed this year, we've been seeing a lot more blood in the streets. And the way our country is, you know, we're at the brink. So this is the effort. The effort is, this is where it is currently as of this day. And now this is including the effort. And now the eggs talk about the responsibilities. So this is the white supreme effort for the whites and their responsibilities that they're working on. They're working on internally, but they're also working on displaying it outwardly in terms of making connections with the black. And this is the directional shift for the corresponding effort and that the blacks have to do, and then the black responsibilities of what they have to do. Now understand that the shift, that what happens is that this process in a way is conditional. Not in a way. This process is conditional. The whites have to make the supreme effort in order for the blacks to make the corresponding effort. Again, why? Because Shoghi Effendi is flipping the script, because blacks have always made the supreme effort and never been, you know, and the whites never had to make a corresponding effort unless they wanted to. But to solve this problem, that shift has to happen. And by doing this shift, what happens is that each side is, how can I say it? Basically, think about your soul, and each side is dealing with this distortion of the soul. You know, the way that teeter-totter is right now, our souls are distorted. If I have to be oppressed in order for somebody to be superior, that's not spiritual. And it's affecting our souls, and it's damaging our souls both ways, whether it's being oppressed or having that air of superiority. It's in excess. It's excessive both ways. So the process of going through this spiritual effort, through the 3 spiritual prerequisites and the binding contract, and making that supreme effort and that corresponding effort, is that what happens is that your soul goes through what I call a little death and a rebirth, because we're tearing down the old, the old familiarity of the old ways. So, for Black folks, if we, continue to make the superior effort, we will never be seen as human beings. Um, and so we have to make the corresponding effort, and it's conditional. If the whites don't make that superior effort, the Blacks cannot make that corresponding effort. So for the whites, what's at peril, like I said, is your soul. And then a good example is like what happened in South Africa with the South African police as apartheid got more and more intense, and there was more and more killings of Black people. You know, people lost their sense of humanity, and there'd be in newspapers officers killing themselves, but killing their whole family because they couldn't stand it anymore. You know, and that unchecked air of superiority, it is dangerous. It's dangerous for one's soul. Just like for Black people to give up our suspicions is dangerous for our soul, without understanding that we can honestly feel in our heart that that white person has opened up their heart to see each other, as spiritual human beings. So it's conditional, folks. This process is conditional. And basically, when the whites make the effort enough so that the Blacks feel that in their heart that that person has opened up their soul and being honest, and they can trust. I mean, open up. If the whites make the supreme effort enough to open up, and as soon as the Black person sees it, then we have to give up our suspicions, and only then we have to give up our suspicion. So it seems very simple on paper, but it's a very hard process to do, because it's definitely a spiritual process, and you're going to need the aid of the reflection and the bringing yourselves to account at all times to get through this part of it, because it is a spiritual process, and you're constantly working on it. Eventually, when that happens, when that mechanism happens, when the whites, demonstrate, the sincerity and all the qualities that are listed after the supreme effort, and the Blacks feel it in their heart, then the Blacks have to let go. They have to let go every trace of suspicion. And you come to this balance of seeing each other as spiritual human beings, equals in terms of humanity, brother and sister. And in terms of process of communication, whatever you say, whatever you do, your body language, everything, that's all part of communication. And for every action, there's a reaction. And the scroll process that Shoghi Effendi has outlined here is basically breaks down the elements so that you understand, and it's based on one individual talking to another individual. So it's so that we understand the process, responsibilities, and the specific connection and how it works in relationship to the whole cycle. And we will go into the double crusade in the next segment. But I have an assignment for you. And the assignment is that I want, however you identify, the white, the black, you might have to use both sides, but however you identify, I want you to run those qualities after the supreme effort. I want you to run those qualities through the reflection process and the reflection process and the reflection process and the bringing yourself to account. And then so when we have our next feedback meeting, I would like to see how many of you would like to share, so that see where you feel like you can make improvements and things like that, and so that we'll have an understanding, to make sure that we have an understanding of how that mechanism works. The next segment will be the double crusade process, and we'll be going into how to talk to groups and how to talk to institutions. That's the first part of the double crusade process. And the second part of the double crusade process, using the scroll process. And the second process is how to listen, and what happens if there's a misunderstanding that occurs, which I call fallout, and how to bring that all the way back to the beginning of the cycle. So until then, you've got your assignment, and I look forward to seeing you at the feedback group, next feedback group. Bye-bye.